Huang Shi sat in a deep, soft chair during the interview, said his name and listened with interest to what they would offer him. The guy was very young because he had recently turned 17 years old. Liu Dongli looked at the guy's resume with interest and thought that he was a good candidate for their job. For several moments, he watched Huang Shi with participation and undisguised curiosity. Then he said that working teenagers are really rare now, and many people take it well. They have an elite organization that will gladly accept him. The guy inspiredly began to list his strengths, which in his opinion would be perfect for this position. He said that he could even clearly demonstrate his professional abilities, but this did not greatly impress the employer. The man said that to work in their elite organization, one must be very good at handling one or more things that were found in the box. When the guy looked there, he lost all enthusiasm because there were a lot of strange objects there to satisfy elderly ladies. Huang Shi indignantly stated that he was going to get a job at their restaurant as a musician, and his interlocutor said that first of all they needed men for communication. This proposal greatly outraged him, and he refused to participate in such matters. Liu Dongli wanted to convince the guy that he treated this position this way because he did not understand all the advantages. It is quite possible that a young person simply has the wrong idea about this profession and does not imagine the difficulties that adults face. And at the same time, youth is not eternal. He carefully took his palms into his hands and looked carefully into the guy's eyes. The man handed him a small bottle and said that this was a small gift to him from the organization, a special high-grade product, and if he liked it, Huang Shi could ask for a repeat dose. He asked the guy not to make hasty decisions and to weigh everything carefully, especially since their organization really needs a type like his. Huang Shi was disappointed. He was thinking about why the adult world is so cruel and unfair. The guy wanted to throw the donated bottle into the nearest trash can, but changed his mind because according to the man, there was some kind of valuable medicine inside that could be sold at a high price. He wanted a career as a musician and was offered a completely inappropriate job. The guy was walking along the noisy city streets and called his older brother to express his dissatisfaction with the interview. But his brother said that, first of all, he was worried about the guy's comfortable existence and organized this interview especially for him. This elite company was looking for beautiful and talented young people. But if the young man did not like it, he would not insist. And in order to smooth out the situation, he invited him to dinner. Suddenly, a strong wind rose around and people began to look worriedly at the large pier nearby. For some reason, it began to burn, and in panic, people screamed loudly, discussed this event, called the police and fire department. The guy watched what was happening for several moments, and at that time his brother was calling him at the other end of the line and did not understand why he was not answering. There were black clouds in the sky. Huang Shi said that they had started to rain heavily, and he could not continue the conversation. The guy understood that it was necessary to hide as quickly as possible, since the rain was only getting stronger every minute. In order to shorten the path and escape quickly, he decided to take a shortcut. But when the guy turned around, he accidentally bumped into a stranger who literally crashed into him. The rain was very heavy and did not allow me to really look at the unfamiliar man in the raincoat. The next moment, the stranger simply fell on the guy and grabbed him very tightly and handed over a strange box. When Huang Shi looked at this stranger, he realized that this man was seriously injured. He was spitting blood and was in very bad condition, literally using his last strength to stand on his feet. The next second, the stranger fell and thick blood flowed from his face. The guy sat down next to the man and tried to understand whether he was alive, but the strange stranger in the cloak was not breathing, from which Huang Shi drew disappointing conclusions for himself. He looked at the box with apprehension. Soon the police arrived at the scene and began asking standard questions to the guy, asking for his name. Then representatives from law enforcement agencies asked how old the guy was. Huang Shi asked the policeman if he was also a local male prostitute. This question amused him somewhat. After the interrogation, the guy left the room and sat down on a chair in deep thought, and a passing policeman asked if everything was okay with the young man. The guy replied that he felt quite well and asked if he could leave this room. The policeman replied that he was fine and praised Huang Shi's strong psyche. Then the young man, just in case, asked what kind of box the stranger gave him, whether it could be some kind of drugs, but the police did not know the answer. Only according to preliminary data, there was no danger. The police officer cordially thanked Huang Shi for calling the police, and the guy, taking his forgotten personal diary, which I joked about and returned to him, left the building. Soon, the guy went further and saw that lightning had lit up in the sky, which foreshadowed a thunderstorm. Huang Shi looked at the sky, not believing that as soon as he went outside it started raining again. some kind of mythical coincidence. He looked into his wallet, making sure that the amount was absolutely minimal and did not cover all his basic needs. The guy walked along the wet streets and thought that it was possible to be even more unhappy than he already was, because he had recently encountered an unfamiliar living corpse. And before that, he almost lost his virginity at a strange job. He soon arrived at the bus stop and continued his thoughts that even the only suit he had was hopelessly ruined with blood, and because of this, the driver did not let him into the vehicle. Remaining sitting at the bus stop and listening to the monotonous sound of falling raindrops, he sadly thought that he did not want to complain, but fate was really fair. After all, he could now continue to be the son of a rich man in the third generation who did not need to worry about food and clothing, and the only thing left to do would be to waste the rest of his days waiting for death. When the guy was 3 years old, his grandfather died, after which his mother began to lead a riotous lifestyle, spending a huge amount of money on drinking and gambling. This led to the fact that the family's property was squandered, and the mother disappeared in an unknown direction, collecting the remaining money. Huang Shi was left alone. Left to his own devices, the only people interested in his life were his endless creditors, and at this time the bus that still took him stopped. Huang Shi was grateful to his grandfather for leaving him the old house in his will, because in addition to all the disasters, it was not enough to remain a vagabond, wandering everywhere like a stray dog. The guy finally arrived home to his old, huge stone fortress. He entered a large, spacious hall and thought that the real miracle was his ability to survive until today. In addition to the fact that the guy was able to survive until today, he is also able, thanks to hard work, to enter a university and receive a scholarship there. And it would also be nice to find a good, decent job that would bring a stable income. The guy took off his shoes and felt relieved that he could finally lie down on his bed and rest a little. Thoughts were swirling in his head like a swarm of flies. He was thinking about whether he would ever be able to overcome this painful stage in his life. Soon, Huang Shi began to fall asleep, but he was awakened from his slumber by the phone signal sending SMS one after another. The guy looked at the screen and saw that there were his sincere congratulations to Mr. Gakwai on the debut of his place of work. A minute later, he saw the glass on the window crack, not yet enough for thieves to break into the estate. Huang Shi was hysterical. He shouted at the silhouette in the window to take advantage of the opportunity and simply kill the guy because he simply did not have the strength to withstand all this. A bolt of lightning hit the crack of the window and a bright light pierced the entire room. The guy screamed in surprise. He fell out of bed and began to watch with fear what would happen next. The young man actually did not want to die. He said that it was just a bad joke. Soon, everything became quiet. Huang Shu sat down on the bed in thought, and a fallen diary came into his field of vision. The guy carefully picked it up. He thought that the magic book could already begin to act, and not just keep notes there. He turned to the book with a request that the entity that was hiding behind the magical inscriptions, be it a brother or a beautiful sister, would send him some kind of sign. But the only thing that a strange printing publication could do was simply duplicate the life and poverty of an ordinary teenager, Huang Shi, for 7 years in a row. At the age of 10, the guy found it, and at the beginning he was very happy, thinking that he could become enlightened among people, but over time he began to understand that this book does not rot. It cannot be lost or burned. It automatically prints his life and no longer brings any benefit. Huang Shi thought that he would be terribly disgraced if these recordings were seen by a large number of people. Still, the author could not be underestimated. The book was written very skillfully. The young man jokingly thought that in the future it would be nice to rewrite some fragment from it and create an exciting novel for which he could receive a fee. Looking through the book, the guy noticed that it had become a little thicker than usual, and soon sheets with names and photographs of people began to fall out of it. Huang Shi enthusiastically thought that the memoirs had finally activated, and he could still become a real exalted guide. But soon, fatigue overwhelmed the guy and he fell into a deep, healing sleep. The rain calmly drummed on the roof and fell rhythmically to the ground, and Huang Shi was fast asleep. He did not notice how a marvelous creature with huge wings bent over his bed. The city's noisy streets were wet from the rain. The guy was dozing at his post and jumped in surprise when his boss woke him up. The security guard received a severe reprimand from the manager for sleeping in the workplace. Then the boss said that he would no longer tolerate this, and with further comments, he would definitely fire the guy. Watching with disgust as the young lady ingratiatingly ran up to his boss, the guard spat with displeasure. Then he lit a cigarette and took a pensive drag, reflecting on his own unlucky life. Suddenly, the guy's thoughts were interrupted by some tramp who apparently wanted to ask for alms. However, when the creature came out of the shadows, The guard looked at him in a daze. Soon, he felt the unbearable pain that came from the terrible wound. The guy fell to the floor in exhaustion. He was left lying in a pool of his own blood, which only increased with every second. And the unknown creepy creature moved on to commit its evil deeds. In the dead of night, disturbing and disappointing news was received in the spacious villa. The woman went to her mistress's room to report these unpleasant circumstances. In her sleep, young lady Ai Ching heard a soft knock on her room, and she gradually opened her eyes. It was raining outside the window. It was late at night. The girl began to emerge from her sleep state and asked for help to get dressed. The young girl slowly stood up and began to pull on her underwear. Then, with the help of the lady who arrived, she put on a white silk shirt and soft, comfortable boots. Ai Ching had a cane in her hand so that she could move around the house independently. After some time, the car drove up to the crime scene. The lights were already on, and there were a lot of police. The lady carefully held the umbrella over the head of the young miss, and the girl slowly rose up. She asked what happened here, and the man who met them said that all authorities already knew about a rather specific crime that had happened. There were many dead people around who were lying on the floor covered with blankets. Ai Ching provided a soft stroller. She decided that she could go inside the premises and see everything on her own as an investigator. Young Miss had never been to places called brothels before. When people went inside, they noticed that there was also a lot of blood on the floor, and a rather unpleasant sight met their eyes. The accompanying man told us that there was a bath center here. Inside the room, there were many half-naked male guards and girls of easy virtue. The first witness was the courier who brought the order to already dead customers. And only an hour later, businessmen and bosses were able to come here. It turned out that there had been a similar attack at the local police station. And here, orderlies walked everywhere and took tests in order to conduct the maximum independent examination. The young lady asked if there was a video surveillance recording taken at the time of the crime, but it turned out that the criminal had broken them. Only a small fragment was found, which was recorded by cameras on buildings. The recording showed a silhouette trying to get inside and to carry out the crime. It was difficult to recognize who it was. The next few frames captured the moment when the criminal climbed into the room through the window. The girl carefully examined the records. They discussed the invasions at the police station in which there were no casualties. After all, at night the room was simply locked and no one was on duty, so casualties were avoided. The recording showed the silhouette of a terrible creature, in whose hands was a strange thing that was found at the crime scene. According to research, this item belonged to a former prisoner named Liu Eryu, a longtime drug addict who died in an alley, and the day before his death, he visited the bath complex. Investigator Ai Ching said she heard a strong explosion occur at the port during the day. And by some strange coincidence, the man died not far from this incident. And the fact that the brothel he visited the day before his death was attacked gave rise to interesting thoughts. Perhaps these events had a direct connection precisely thanks to the box that was with him, the young lady said with annoyance that she was the last to know about everything. The man, embarrassed, muttered that in the turmoil he did not adhere too closely to clear regulations. But she did not hold a grudge, because no one would like it when a girl who had not even reached the age of 20 suddenly began to command them. The young investigator was interested in who was able to discover the body of the deceased drug addict. She learned that it was a teenager named Huang Shi, who happened to be at the scene and called the police. The guy washed himself carefree and hummed some song to himself. He was in a fairly good mood. Suddenly, he heard some extraneous sound and looked at the locked door. A huge, terrible stream of blood poured out. The door began to gradually open and the guy noticed an ugly paw all stained with blood. Soon it was possible to notice that the paw belonged to a creepy-looking creature vaguely reminiscent of a monkey. It sparkled with its evil eyes and grinned its huge snow-white teeth in a nasty grin. Huang Shi was scared. He screamed loudly at the sight of such an alien in his bathroom. Suddenly, he felt that he was falling and hit his head painfully on the floor, opened his eyes and found himself near the bed. The guy felt himself covered in cold sweat and realized that it was just a bad dream. Having calmed down a little, he sighed with relief and lay down on the bed wondering why he was having this nightmare. Perhaps the scene at the pier with the dead man etched in his memory influenced him so much but in any case, it was necessary to start the day and the guy decided to go to the wash basin to freshen up. But as soon as he opened the door, armed and angry soldiers appeared on the threshold. Huang Shi peacefully asked them not to shoot because he was his own man and had not harmed anyone. Liu Dongli woke up and opened his eyes. Outside the window, it was daylight, and the bright sun was shining. The man felt like his head was still heavy and wobbly from yesterday. He went into the bathroom and turned on the cold water, remembering the client who had been with him the day before. Then Liu spent time as always in the bar and had intimate conversations with the girls. But by all indications, his yesterday's interlocutor was assertive and achieved what she wanted. Over a glass of dry red wine, the girl opened up. She was very interested in whether men liked older women or young ladies. Liu Dongli replied with a charming smile that he had no idea what others thought about it, but at the moment he belonged only to her. But the girl considered him an ordinary mediocre man who the next morning already forgets about the one whose head he turned. With these words, she threw her glass aside and decisively attacked the man. She said that she would definitely prove how women can skillfully play with the feelings of men. But in her eyes, there was pain and disappointment that could not be healed by alcohol and casual relationships. The man calmly said that his soul and body belong exclusively to her. But it's not that simple. After all, he is definitely sure that the girl next to him deserves much more. She suffers but is able to cope with this condition and maintain her own dignity. Liu Dongli hugged her carefully and asked her not to be upset because of the bastard who was not worth her tears. Today, the best solution for a girl would be to sleep in a calm environment and gain strength. While enjoying the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the man thought about the fact that he had been involved in public relations for many years. He spent countless nights in clubs and began to see right through the people who came there. Only recently, things were not going well, and it was becoming more and more difficult. Liu Dongli remembered a recent interview with a promising newcomer, but the guy's decision remained unknown. He looked at his page, thinking that being popular is also a kind of sin. He could use his special abilities in his work, but the consequences are unknown. Suddenly, a call from Miss Young Investigator Ai Ching appeared on the screen. The man didn't understand how she managed to do absolutely everything. With a good-natured smile, he answered and asked why Miss hadn't called him for so long. They agreed to meet at the office for special work in just a quarter of an hour. The huge white building was located in Shanghai, where extremely urgent tasks needed to be completed. Ai Ching secretly watched as they interviewed the teenager's only witness. The menacing men asked the guy his name, and he introduced himself with apprehension. Soon after this, a question followed about the young man's age, and he answered that he was 17 years old. The men demanded that he answer as truthfully as possible and tell where he was last night. Huang Shi, who had lost patience, noticed that this question had been repeated 20 times already. The guy said that after the interview he was going home, but accidentally came across a murder which he immediately reported, and after giving testimony he came home, then almost immediately fell asleep. Huang Shi was very tired of all this interrogation and wanted to be released as soon as possible. Suddenly it dawned on the guy and he asked if this company was recruiting male prostitutes. Ai Ching lost all patience and wanted to let him go because they couldn't get anything intelligible from him, but her employees still had hopes because this guy was the only witness. After some time, they noticed that the long-awaited guest had finally arrived. Liu Dongli entered the room and looked around those present and then greeted everyone. The man noticed that his recent acquaintance from an interview was here. They looked at each other puzzled, not imagining how fate brought them together again. Huang Shi was very indignant. He turned to the men and said that if they were not recruiting male prostitutes, then why did their brother come here? The guy added in rage that he was not going to sell his body and would definitely report this incident to the relevant authorities. But Liu Dongli told the young man to look at his finger. Huang Shi did not intend to do this, but inadvertently looked. Huang Shi's gaze became glassy and he suddenly realized how wrong he was about this man. He wanted to please Liu Dongli at all costs, so he apologized for being rude at the last meeting. The guy said that he was ready to go to work even tomorrow and hoped that the place was not already taken. Liu Dongli replied that they would still have enough time to discuss this, but now the young man needed to honestly tell him what he did last night. Huang Shi looked at his interlocutor enthusiastically and said that he was ready to tell him everything, including the bank card passwords, and last night he slept peacefully at home. The guy added that during such heavy rain, he did not dare to go outside. Liu Dongli was also interested in what was in the box that he left at the police station. But Huang Shi said that he was afraid to open this box because there could be anything there. He was already scared to death of the living corpse of the one who handed it over. Ai Ching listened carefully to all the answers and said that there was simply no point in further questioning. Her interlocutor noticed that the ability of Liu Dongli's soul to charm affects people very effectively. However, if the person being interrogated can also master this skill, then one can no longer count on the correctness of this method. The girl replied that they could figure it out themselves, and the guy should be released. After all, it's pointless to keep him in the office and endlessly ask the same questions. Soon, Huang Shu came outside and remembered his recent state. He felt sick from these thoughts. He did not understand how he was influenced, and hoped that this would not happen in the future. Huang Shu thought, why, everyone is so interested in this box, which actually looks ominous, and hides some secrets. And he also didn't understand why he was asked many times what he did last night. But in fact, nothing special happened soon after arriving home. He fell asleep. Huang Shi remembered a terrible dream about him being a security guard at a bath center. He looked around and noticed that the surroundings seemed familiar to him. The rain began pouring down in buckets again. The guy saw opposite him the building of the bath center that he had dreamed about. Huang Shi could not believe that such terrible coincidences actually happen. The guy was walking along the road and suddenly we heard an ominous voice that said that the people in that building were dead, and he was next in line. The door to a gloomy building, with a pale light from lamps, opened and a monster entered. He went to his boss's office to report on the work done. After all, he did everything so that the box was found, and he could continue to carry out his plan. The boss, a bald man, asked if it was possible to get this valuable item. The monster silently threw the bag on the table. There was a box in it. The man, with a sinking heart, opened it and took out a small square box, but it was empty inside. He angrily blurted out that it was necessary to find out what was inside, but his interlocutor replied that he had found it already empty. He added that he did not have the abilities that would allow him to use this thing, but the man reminded him that he received money for his work. The monster said that he took payment, but the return of the shrine can be considered as atonement for sin. And if not for the decision of the boss, then his own subordinates would not have betrayed him, and the shrine would not have gone into the wrong hands. In this situation, it is necessary to figure out how to fix everything. The bald man thought about it. He said that it was necessary to remember the events in the smallest detail. Perhaps the monster encountered something strange or special people, but he replied that he killed everyone who met on the way, and nothing else special happened. This explanation did not suit the boss at all. He said that it was necessary to find a surviving person who could touch this thing. Huang Shi stopped in horror. He tried to understand where the voice threatening him came from. He turned around and began to look at the empty street, but there were no people nearby. It was strange to realize that the voice that spoke to him belonged to some invisible creature. But after a moment, the guy looked up and finally realized who said these words. A large black raven sat on a high street lamp and sparkled with bright eyes. Huang Shu looked at the bird thoughtfully. He could not imagine that this was actually happening. But suddenly, the bird spoke, and there was no longer any doubt. The raven said that this was really happening and definitely not another nightmare. The guy looked at the raven puzzled and then lost all composure because recently mythical events had happened to him. Raven said that every day he did not spare himself watching the young man's life and noticed that Huang Shi already treats him as a member of the family. The guy realized that it was not just a bird, but a creature capable of describing his life in a diary. The raven was the same tattered book that was always with him. Black Crow said that he is a fragment of something grandiose, but now, due to certain circumstances, he is only able to record what is happening. And the next moment, the bird flew up and said that if the guy continues to confuse him with a creature from the kingdom of heaven, then it will be very funny. Soon the raven sat on the guy's shoulder and said that now it doesn't matter who he is. Now it is necessary to find out whether it is true that Huang Shi does not trust him at all and thinks that he will be framed. As for the words, he said, entries in diaries about people before death exist, and Huang Shi felt it himself. The guy felt a sharp pain in his stomach, and finally realized that the nightmares were not just a harmless dream. And all those people who interacted with the box in one way or another were already dead. There were many valuable things inside the box, even after sleeping for so many years. It was still difficult to see objects of similar quality. Raven said that in honor of their meeting, he could help the young man with his problems. Huang Shi could not understand whether to trust the bird because all this resembled an incredible story. After some time, they went to the guy's house to perform the ceremony. Huang Shi bought many items for this: silver, all kinds of metals and potions. The guy told the raven that his accounts were empty and he was deeply in debt, but still allocated money for these purchases. Raven replied that all this was for the sake of alchemy, because creating stigmata is not easy for such an ordinary person. In Huang Shi's understanding, stigmata were ridiculous computer games with a simple plot. But in fact, this was not entirely true. They, in turn, represented the fruit of analysis in the heritage of the gods and opened the way to the divine. Thanks to the stigmata, there was research and imitation of the gods, as well as knowledge of the power left by their legacies. By its nature, It is a tiny miracle created from metal and incense that imitates the power of real miracles. Raven said that the gods were always present and once had great power, but now they are all dead. And what disappeared in the river of time should not bother the world today. At this point, it is possible that even the memory of them will completely disappear and no one will remember about it. Huangshi realized that if he could create stigmata, he would look at the properties of the character just like in the game, and thus get rid of misfortunes in his life. Raven confirmed that it was so. This really inspired the guy and he wanted to try it. It was deep night outside and only the moon and lonely wandering stars were shining brightly. The guy was very serious. He was able to extract blood from his finger to add the cooking. Raven said that even the simplest stigmata could not be created using ordinary fire and metal, but now the most primitive form of them could be created. But in the future, the guy can make more serious elixirs, and this may require the blood of amazing spiritual beings. He needed to remember that there was only one chance to create stigmata, and it could not be released. After all, Huangshi doesn't have much money to start creating from the very beginning, so he had to act. Suddenly, the bowl lit up, and amazing steam came out which lit up the whole room. Raven said that this is the source of matter. It begins to burn and the soul, or rather a piece of it, is exposed. When he doesn't have enough material, only the flame can be used, and today they can use the supplies from the box. Now the guy understood what was in this box because it contained many human souls. And for the reason that he was the last living person who saw this thing, he was interrogated so furiously. Raven asked the guy not to think long and quickly start preparations. Soon the room was illuminated by a bright blue light that even spread to the street. Magic light shone from all the windows of the huge villa. It was so bright that it was hard for the guy to look at how everything around him lit up. Raven had hope that he had not made a mistake in his choice, and it was not in vain that he bet on this man. He flew away, and Huangshi watched as blue smoke rose into the air from the bowl. Soon the liquid that was inside them began to rise, forming intricate figures. And then a lot of feathers began to fall down, and one with his photograph fell into the guy's hands. He saw that the book had opened. It was like the last scene of a real miracle on Earth, and his paperclip playing skill reached level 6. This was an excellent indicator. Now he could use his stigma. But Huangshu didn't really understand how to control it. He picked up a pen and began to write. A bright light formed around him and spread throughout the room. The guy had abilities with which he could achieve good results and finally change his life. Meanwhile, order was being restored at the seaport after the recent explosion. A lot of police and correspondents gathered there and recorded everything on camera. I Ching, together with Liu Dongli, went to the crime scene to obtain new facts and possibly find clues. The investigator said that in this place the body of another victim was found, who died a painful death, and during his life, he was a drug addict. Liu Dongli noticed that these cases looked much larger than the investigator described. The man also said that, apparently, her partner had examined everything here and had already found interesting facts. I Ching replied that they came here just to see the scene of the incident and more information could be found in the forensic reports. Moreover, the company that transported the containers was illegal, since customs control was listed as a manufacturer of bags. It could be assumed that the box was a special relic, and someone could use it for their own purposes. It is also possible that an armed confrontation occurred here, which broke out due to the uneven distribution of spoils. The surviving man escaped, taking the trophy with him, but on the way he met the guy. In a short time, the man died due to severe wounds without waiting for help. Liu Dongli asked what the young man's name was because this information flew out of his head. The investigator replied that his name was Huang Shi. The man asked if they knew each other. The girl hastily said that they did not know each other very well, and added that she had much more serious questions, and they worried her very much. Psychedelics, that is, a new drug created using a source of matter, were found at the scene. That is, it was obvious that the drug was made using a relic of the box and it resembled a huge mystery. But Liu Dongli began to think, because this incident had nothing particularly to do with him, why did he need to know all this? His interlocutor said that she had a request, so she explained the nuances and problems of the investigation. A small favor that only Liu Dongli and no one else can do. This is a visit to the army parade ground where future brave fighters are trained. Liu Dongli gnashed his teeth in rage, but fulfilling the request was very important. Huangshi was in formation on a large field next to his colleagues. Training battles took place between the military. Many of them ran in order to disperse the blood. The guy felt uncomfortable watching all this, but he also needed to prove himself. The coach called him in for a little sparring. Huang Shi had to show what he was capable of during a fistfight, but the guy did not have time to react and received a blow to the face, as a result of which he staggered a little. He couldn't stay on his feet and fell to the ground, but the coach suggested he try again. Huang Shi understood that he was not in his body and had to show his abilities. He stood up and intended to continue the fight honestly, while justifying his good name. But again he failed, and the next second he was defeated again. The coach shouted that Chen Bo was especially slow today. It was too suspicious. The guy again flew to the side because he could not repel the blow of the coach attacking him. Suddenly, Huang Shi saw an entry in a book that reflected the memories of Chen Bo, who once served as a guard. This circumstance greatly puzzled the guy. He could not understand how he could have the memories of a stranger in his mind. Suddenly he realized that he was lying on the cold floor, but he felt as if everything that was happening in reality. In fact, it was just an unusual nightmare he had. Huang Shi had in her memory many moments that had never happened to him. The guy jumped up. He wanted to find out why this was all happening to him. Suddenly he felt an infusion structure on his hand through which memories were apparently transmitted. The black raven who was sitting on the window said that it looks like they still managed to cure the guy from that problem with the darlings. Huang Shi muttered that he apparently had to thank the bird for this. And among his main successes, the most important was that the guy managed to return from there alive. He opened the book, thinking about the ability of his stigmata, which was based on being subjected to violence even in his sleep. But thanks to the skills he learned there, it was possible to reach the maximum level. Eventually, through hard work and endless practice, the guy will be able to reach level 10. Huang Shi noticed that the information that was previously in the book has now disappeared. Raven explained that the memories of all people are described in this book because they are directly connected with the young man. And there is only one reason why the memories of many completely different people are placed here. The raven flew to the window and looked at the trees that were located opposite. Then he thoughtfully added that the reason was that all these people died because of Huang Shi. The guy looked at the bird in puzzlement. He couldn't believe what was the direct cause of their death. And the raven continued to say that in fact, only 5 of the 70 victims can have a strong source of matter, and therefore are recorded in the memory of the book. Huang Shi looked thoughtfully at the book, thinking that perhaps they would never have died if he had not handed the box to the police station. But in that case, the guy would have turned out to be one of these murdered victims. It was extremely difficult to realize. Raven looked thoughtfully at the street and said that the world is actually not as serene as it seems at first glance. After all, there is heaven and earth, a country and a city which seem quite familiar and so safe. But there are also terrible things in the world that are better not to know and not to see. Even if you end up in this hell, it is not a fact that you will be able to find out the whole truth about it. The bird's eyes flashed with a strange fire. He asked the guy if Huang Shi had a soul. The master was sitting in a large, bright office with a cheerful icon behind him. He thought intensely about where the box had gone, into what hands it had fallen. Suddenly, hurried steps were heard in the distance, and an out-of-breath man entered the room. He would have shouted that they completed the task, were able to obtain video from the surveillance cameras. The master hoped that his subordinate did not leave any traces there. The man assured that everything was fine. He was able to quietly take the recording and you can be calm. The master picked up the tape with the recording and told the rest of the people to come in the evenings every weekend. His subordinate was somewhat puzzled since they had an agreement to come at the end of the month. However, his boss shouted that the man himself must come up with some kind of justification for this and be smart. His subordinate, embarrassed, said that he would do everything in the best possible way and hurried away. The master was left alone. He wanted to quickly watch the recording to find out the fate of his thing. The moment of the explosion appeared on the screen, and then it was noticeable how the man ran along with the box. He passed through crossroads and alleys near a large stone house. The master watched in suspense what would happen next and where this man would go. Soon the camera recorded a guy walking along the alleys and talking on the phone. The master's hands began to tremble. He began to suspect that this particular young man was involved in the disappearance of the box. He carefully watched what would happen next and how events would develop. The tension increased and the man watched with bated breath where this guy was going. He had some ideas and decided that a plan needed to be developed. And at this time, Huang Shi looked carefully at the raven, trying to understand what the essence of the bird's question about the soul was. After some time, he said that of course he has a soul and longs to possess it. He wants a lot of money, power, and girls. But at the same time, Huang Shi understood that every person has a soul that he possesses. Raven said that in fairy tales every character has a happy ending, but is this really true? Indeed, in fact, ascending people differ from ordinary people precisely because of the presence of a soul. At the moment, there is one creation called the Sea of Silver, but it is probably more correct to call it the source of success. The main essence of which is to create a projection of each individual person. There is an opinion that this is an invisible ocean, which is very large, and all the wisdom of people in comparison with it is just a small drop. But in reality, it is not often that ascenders rely on special permission. Most come through awakening as free riders. It is precisely this difficult, dangerous free rider path that Huang Shi should also follow. All you need to do is collect several reserves and then use them to fly into the stratosphere on a rocket. This will be a dangerous and unpredictable journey, but it must be overcome in order to feel the gravitational pull of the silver field. And if a guy wants to succeed, he needs to go beyond this standard path as you will need to get into a situation that will stimulate him. Adding a little luck, this is somewhat reminiscent of playing the lottery, where only a select few are lucky. Huang Shi asked what would happen to those who were not among the lucky ones. The raven fell silent for a few moments. He was in no hurry to answer, but apparently they would not have to expect anything good. Then he said that there is no need to worry about it, and the most important thing for a guy is to gain unquestioning confidence. After all, in the hands of Huang Shi there was a great advantage in the form of the Book of Fate, which would make the path easier. The guy agreed and asked what he should do first. Raven said that for this purpose it is only necessary to do a little. Kill someone, making the entries in the Book of Destinies more detailed. Thanks to these murders, you can become a real grandiose genius. And the more people the guy can kill, the stronger he will eventually become. Raven advised him to remember all the offenders who hurt Huang Shi with their ridicule. It was not only about classmates or teachers, but also his parents and the closest people who abandoned him. This world is unfair, so why be kind to him? But the guy hesitated, and the raven said that he noticed his fear of the unknown. Huang Shu looked at the bird and asked if it was true that the only action he had ahead of him was to kill someone. He remembered Li Wuyang, a malicious guy who constantly bragged about his influential uncle and could become the first victim along with his girlfriend. Third, he could destroy the English teacher because he constantly scolded Huang Shi in front of the whole class, as well as his frostbitten friend along with his brother. The guy decided that he would be a man who fearlessly fights evil injustice. It would also be nice to get rid of the agent who framed Huang Shi, and now the guy has lost part of the money he earned. All these people should have been punished, but suddenly Huang Shi felt that he could not do this because it was wrong to take someone's life. He understood what happens when not everyone likes him, and this is normal. Perhaps there is something wrong with him, but even though these people offended him, they do not deserve to die. After all, they are ordinary creatures who just want to build their lives and do not want to die. Just like those unfortunate victims of the attack on the bath complex, the guy said that he did not like the raven's offer. He could not accept it. Huang Shi clenched his fists. He did not want to step over his own conscience and deal so cruelly even with the offenders. These words upset the raven very much. He did not understand why the guy was so ungrateful and unfair to him. Raven said that he belongs to him and is doing everything to make Huang Shi happy and have the long-awaited success. He said that he had to offer this, but if the guy is not satisfied with this, then there is a backup option to solve this problem. Huang Shi was happy about this and began to listen carefully, but plan B was that he had to die himself. Huang Shi felt as if he was being strangled by some invisible force. It became difficult to breathe. The Black Raven watched the guy with interest. He understood that this was necessary for the business. In Huang Shi's Book of Life, lines about him, his condition and worries began to appear. But after a moment, the letters began to erase and disappear from the pages, and a cloud of energy appeared above the book. Raven watched this. He understood that this is how the liberation of the soul should happen. Huang Shi gave pieces of his soul to the book, and they merged in a magical tandem. Raven said that if it were not for the constant draining of energy from the source, the guy would have awakened many years ago. Huang Shi opened his eyes. He was surprised to find that he was in a crowded place. Everyone was in a hurry somewhere. He was next to the rails along which the subway car ran. It was a metro station. Huang Shi picked up a book that, for some reason, he had. The guy saw that a message was coming to his phone and began to read it carefully. In these SMS, the person complained that he was unfairly fired, and now there is no way to provide for his family. Huang Shi blocked this man and saw that the carriage he needed to ride was approaching. Suddenly, he heard a threatening voice behind him that said that Huang Shi needed to go to hell. With these words, the guy was pushed. He was unable to maintain his balance and stay on the ground. The guy began to fall rapidly, and the subway car moving at speed had no opportunity to slow down. People looked at this in horror. They were confused but did not have time to influence the situation in any way. They wanted to catch the villain who committed this, but it was too late. He quickly disappeared from view. Huang Shu opened his eyes. He didn't understand where he was and came to his senses from the fact that he was called by a difficult man who asked him to get ready because the battle had begun. Huang Shi noticed that there was a heavy structure on him that hindered movement. The guy looked around and noticed that he was in a place with many ruins and ruins. It was necessary to strive forward in order to defeat the enemies advancing on them. Creepy creatures were approaching everywhere and had to be defeated. The fighters opened fire, and bullets were fired at the enemies from all sides. However, the next second there was a retaliatory blow. The guy turned away so as not to be hit. A huge blue cloud was heading towards him, capable of sweeping away everything in its path. He found himself chained to a large log and shouted out that he wanted to know why they were doing this to him. Soon, a man in a long black robe approached Huang Shi with a huge burning torch. He also noticed that many people who crowded around intended to resist what was happening and protect him. But a man who approached the guy said that today it was time to die for his faith. He then threw a torch to the place where Huang Shi was tied, causing flames to ignite around him. The guy realized that he was burning and had no way to escape. He screamed with a wild cry. The Black Raven looked at all this and thought that the guy had been in an exhausted state for many years, giving energy to the Book of Destinies and at the same time being under constant stress for about 7 years. At the beginning, it seemed to him that the death records influenced the book, and it would take some time to break the barrier. But even with the passage of time, it was still not possible to look further into the guy's life. No matter how hard the Black Raven tried, he could not reproduce the picture that opens after 10 years. This had never happened before, and it was a mystery how Huang Shi was different from the others. Raven wanted to understand what this amazing guy was hiding and thought that perhaps the reason for the whole new moon. Soon he noticed that Huang Shi gradually opened his eyes and his breathing evened out. Raven decided that it was still possible to lend a little energy to the guy because the pattern was not too big yet. A soft blue spherical cloud of energy spread over Huang Shi's body. It was necessary to see if the guy would eventually be able to build the bridge and take advantage of the opportunity given to him. The moon was shining brightly in the backyard. There was a monument to an ancient girl with a jug. Huang Shi sat silently on the steps. He thought that he had been very tired lately and felt exhausted. The guy involuntarily shed a tear that appeared as a result of these thoughts. Raven noted that instead of complaining, the young man could die one more time and thus improve the quality of his source. But the guy replied that it was hard for him to stand it. He felt worse than if he were a ghost. He added that this was completely unfair because he had to die many times and eventually stopped feeling anything at all. Huang Shi also remembered that school would start soon, but he was still poor and had made absolutely no progress in getting rich. Raven said that there were advantages to this because the guy was able to learn very useful skills. But Huang Shu believed that even the skills of army hand-to-hand combat would not have saved him from the attack of that madman whom he had recently met. Suddenly, an incomprehensible noise was heard behind the guy's back, and soon the door to the house opened slightly. This incident was very strange, and Huang Shu was wondering what to do. He muttered that he wasn't expecting any guests today. The Raven didn't know who it could be. Raven suggested that perhaps someone wants to connect to Huang Shi's central network in order to steal electricity. And then he added that, in fact, he also secretly extended a network cable to neighboring networks, and now it was possible to use their Wi-Fi, which, by the way, is very good. The guy sighed sadly. He understood that there was only one way out, and under no circumstances could he allow himself to be robbed. Therefore, Huang Shi carefully looked at where the sound came from and hid, clutching the reinforcement in his hands. The voices were coming from the top floor. Now it was well and clearly audible, there was no doubt. The guy was scared because the robbers were well-armed men, he thought for a while, but realized that he couldn't leave everything like that. It was necessary to decide on something. Huang Shi held his weapon in his grip, but his hands were shaking. The bandits were clearly looking for something. They rummaged through all the closets, scattered papers, and rummaged through bags. The next second the guy heard the zipper on his violin case open. It was already too much. He could not allow men to break, or in any way damage his precious violin. One of the bandits looked at it from all sides but was not satisfied, suggesting that perhaps the object they were looking for was inside the instrument. He decided that he needed to check this assumption. The guy could no longer look at it because he valued his violin very much and could not allow it to be dismantled. He attacked the bandits with all his might and shouted that first of all, they should check how their heads would react to the blow of his armature. Now that one of the bandits lay immobilized, it was possible to deal with the next one. Huang Shi swung with all the strength he had to hit the man's head, but he did it poorly. He miscalculated and missed, thereby giving time for the bandit to destroy his weapon. Now the piece of heavy metal lay separately and could not harm anyone. Huang Shi thought that now was the time to use his army hand-to-hand combat skills. He remembered the techniques he had learned in his sleep, which would be very useful to him now. It was necessary to gather strength and not retreat in these attempts to protect oneself. Huang Shi reproduced the technique that made it possible to strike from the foot. But suddenly, his opponent showed dexterity and was able to grab the guy by the throat. Now, it was difficult for Huang Shi to free himself, and he also hit his head painfully on the tiled floor. The bandit said angrily that he could fend off army hand-to-hand combat well. At this time, his partner came to his senses. He had a very bad headache and thick blood flowed from the wound. The man said that he would not leave it, and now it was time to take revenge on the guy. Huang Shi looked in horror at the hammer that had prepared him. But the next second he was able to grab the mask from the bandit's face and see his face. This angered the men even more. They decided that under no circumstances could they now leave him alive. The guy understood that this was the end, and his hopes of surviving this fight were very minimal. Raven advised him to remember those moments when the young man died in his sleep, but he did not understand how this could help. Was it really the only thing left to do was think about how death happened in a dream and come to terms with the inevitable? The hammer was raised above the guy's head. He felt that he was going into a state of another dimension. The hand fell weakly to the floor, but a small ray of hope slowly fell into the palms. Huang Shi raised his hand and blinded the enemy in such a way that he could not resist. Raven nodded with satisfaction, because this is exactly what needed to be done. The fight was in full swing. The men continued to press him without stopping, but the guy resisted. He shouted out that he couldn't stand it anymore. It hurt him very badly and unbearably. One of the attackers felt strong remorse for his family and began to ask for their forgiveness. The second also remembered his mother, whom he could not send off normally on his final journey. The bandit suffered and could not understand how this guy could influence them so much. The men burst into tears, and the only thing they wanted was to quickly destroy Huang Shi. The guy fiercely bit his opponent, thus causing him great pain. He nevertheless took advantage of the enemy's second of confusion and was able to rise, taking the initiative of the battle to himself. Huang Shi knocked them to the floor and began using army fighting methods. But they were professionals in their field, so the guy had a hard time. The fight had been going on for quite some time and no one was going to give in. They decided that they needed to sort this out as quickly as possible and go on in search. Soon the bandit found a hammer and swung it with all his fury, trying to kill the guy as quickly as possible. But this was not destined to happen, as those present heard suddenly fired shots. It was investigator Ai Qing who arrived at the crime scene and called everyone to order. Along with her came Liu Dongli, who rushed forward to scout out everything. The guy looked carefully at those who came in. He didn't expect to see them here. Suddenly, he discovered that the bandit had stopped behaving aggressively and was looking at Liu Dongli like a faithful dog. Now, Huang Shi understood how the man used his magical technique and manipulated those present into submission. This also affected Huang Shi. He bowed his head and did not dare to look at Liu Dongli. There was an awkward pause. The beaten bandits lay on the floor, and the hidden Huang Shi watched what would happen next. Ai Qing greeted him and noticed that they had not met for a long time. The guy looked at her carefully. The girl had a stern look. She silently hid the weapon in her pocket. Huang Shi greeted him shyly, and there was an awkward pause. They tied up the bandit who survived and decided to interrogate him. Liu Dongli asked what the man's name was, but he was not in the mood to talk, and he said that his name was Zhao Baozhu, but did not take his eyes off his interlocutor. Liu Dongli noticed that this man's brain had been dug into someone's brain for a long time, and now he was nothing more than a walking, living corpse. It was clearly not possible to achieve any definite benefit from him for the investigation. By all indications, it was obvious that this bandit had gone crazy and had no connection with reality. So they decided not to have a dialogue and just get rid of him in a few moments. In front of those present, the man burned and simply disappeared as if he had never existed. Huang Shi watched this in surprise. He could not imagine how this was possible. Ai Qing pondered what to do with the guy and came to the conclusion that he should be left as bait. Liu Dongli seriously thought about the abilities of this girl, because when everyone thought that the killer had taken the box, she drew conclusions and found exactly what she should have. Apparently, the killer also missed the box and will be in search of it, trying to capture Huang Shi by any means. And by using this guy as bait, you can make great progress in the investigation. But Huang Shi didn't like this idea at all, because he already barely had enough to live on. Even considering that he worked 4 jobs, the guy added that it was useless to follow him because in the end, he would simply die of hunger. I Ching pointed the gun at the guy and wanted him to confirm his words. Huang Shi could not withstand this tension. He said that the violin feeds him, and even if he is shot today, nothing can be achieved. The girl silently showed the account to the guy, which had a very large amount of money on it. He stopped short. The next moment, Huang Shi was showered with gratitude. He said that every person should try to do something useful for others. He said that there is no need to feel sorry for him and that he is not a delicate flower, but that dear comrades can make themselves at home and feel at home. After some time, the guy was left alone and carefully examined his violin. The Black Raven looked in from his hiding place and said that because of these people he had to hide. Huang Shi was unhappy that his friend was missing, but the Raven told how he helped form light in the guy's palm and thus protect him. This was called the turning point of disasters, with the help of which the young man was able to free himself during a fight. Raven explained that this substance was the result of the formation of deaths and disappointments combined together, a kind of raw material. When a guy experienced someone's death, information about him was recorded in a book, and one could experience fear with the help of which the ashes of disasters were formed. But this was not a specific ability of the soul, but was just a byproduct as a result of subconscious thought processes. It could be compared to the noise of a washing machine, water from an air conditioner, or the heat from cooking on an induction stove, but the guy found these comparisons offensive. Raven thought about how to correctly describe this phenomenon that happened to him, and he added that Huang Shi can also be called a machine for producing negative energy. The young man thought deeply about this. He thought that she could emit negative energy, but it still works with positive energy, and in this way it is possible to create the ashes of happiness. But the Raven explained that this is not entirely true, and in order to receive the Liberator's ashes, you need to activate happy memories, which made the guy very angry. After all, Huang Shi had absolutely no happy memories, and his whole life seemed like an impenetrable darkness. But it was useless to quarrel, and the young man suggested changing the topic. Raven said that since there are now other people in the guy's house, he needs to be careful and hide for a while. He said that the guy would have to rely on himself, and advised him not to indulge in dying memories about trying something new. Raven explained how he does this by closing his eyes and simply letting his soul empty. But Huang Shi can use some other method such as drawing or writing. Huang Shi decided that the most successful activity would be playing the violin, which he loved very much. Suddenly, the sounds of the violin were heard by Liu Dongli, who came in. He said that he had completely forgotten about the guy's passion and was a little scared. The man advised to take a musical instrument with you to work, and thereby you can earn a lot more. The guy was indignant because he agreed that they would be his bodyguards, but there was no agreement to accompany him to work. Liu Dongli good-naturedly patted him on the shoulder and said that I Ching wants them to be together around the clock, and if he refuses, the guy can say goodbye to his life much earlier than the killer finds him, and since he will receive money for this, he needs to come to terms with it. Then the man asked where the tools were in this house. The guy became wary, but Liu Dongli explained that the corpse of the second bandit was still in the garden and needed to be buried. The guy was extremely indignant. He would never have agreed to bury anyone in his garden, and suggested using no man's land at the end of the building for this purpose. When Huang Shi was left alone, he sadly thought that these people did not have human qualities at all. He dreamed that in the end, it would all end. It would be possible to get rid of these people, but at the moment he had to be patient. He had the only thing that always warmed his soul. This is playing the violin. He could play endlessly, immersing himself in this amazing and wonderful world of music. Huang Shi forgot all his troubles, let go of his worries, and began to play his favorite melody. At some point, he felt that he had no limitations and could move in the air. He was able to fly and hover over the ground with ease in this position. Huang Shi realized that even the walls were not an obstacle, and he could pass through them. This discovery greatly inspired the guy, and he decided to check what his guests were doing. He flew out into the street and began to hover over an old abandoned backyard. He noticed that Liu Dongli was looking for equipment in order to quickly get rid of the corpse. Huang Shi realized that it was still impossible to pass through the glass, and there was a certain obstacle. Despite the fact that he had such abilities, it was not possible to pass through glass. His house glowed with a transparent magical light and illuminated the area around. The Black Raven watched what was happening. He was pleased that Huang Shi was able to figure it out and use his abilities. This was a kind of protection, but still, the guy had to experience more troubles and pain. This was necessary for himself. After all, source separation is an extremely dangerous procedure, and if you are not protected during the process, you can become a victim of persecution. It was early in the morning and Liu Dongli burst into the guy's bathroom to express his dissatisfaction with the night spent. Huang Shi was calmly brushing his teeth and pretending that he didn't know anything. He asked what made the man so excited. Liu Dongli began to say that strange things happened to him that night. At first, he heard some strange sounds of dripping water coming from the bathroom. Then there was a feeling that someone was walking because the crunching of the floorboards was clearly audible. And it also seemed to the man that someone was standing behind him. He was outraged that he had not been warned in advance about the presence of ghosts in this house. But the guy calmed him down and said that although his house was quite old, there could be no otherworldly forces here. Liu Dongli was just tired, so it seemed to him. He was about to head for the exit, but Liu Dongli said that the guy should take creams to use in his work as a gigolo. And although he didn't like it at all, Huang Shi didn't argue. The next evening, they went to the event and did the required work. They said goodbye to the girl and stood in the twilight of the night. Huang Shi asked if this scent really contained the effect of gigolo's mythical ability. But angrily, Liu Dongli replied that her perfume with rhododendron metternich, which has approximately the same effect, because that man apologized to her for spending nights with her an endless number of times, and that she now saw him as a son. And now this daddy has earned a lot of money as a result of just one meeting. Huang Shi asked what happened next, but his interlocutor sadly noted that he had been caught. I Ching was unshakable. She decided to punish Liu Dongli for using naive girls for his own purposes. She said that from that moment the man would be deprived of his freedom and had to work off all the money he received fraudulently. Huang Shi asked why, in this case, Liu Dongli did not use his superpowers, and he received the answer that he used them, but they turned out to be useless and had no effect on the girl. I Ching is very cruel and unpredictable despite her name. Such concepts as love and sympathy are alien to her. The guy noticed that Black Raven was watching their conversation and became a little wary. But a moment later, the bird flew up and they decided to move on. Liu Dongli said that because of the guy, he had the second half of the night completely free. And as compensation, he can expect an invitation to a late dinner from Huang Shi. But suddenly, Liu Dongli stopped short and prepared a pistol. He saw a very suspicious person behind the guy's back. It was a familiar feeling in the form of chills, which was called a skill from the Book of Fates. Behind the guy's back was a monster who had already come to him in a dream. It was a premonition of death. Liu Dongli decided it was time to act and rushed at the monster. The guy wanted to avoid danger at all costs and forced his body to move. A huge clawed paw swung, but Huang Shi had ash in his palms. At the moment when the monster attacked the guy, he received a retaliatory blow. The monster screamed and Huang Shi flew to the side several meters, hitting the ground painfully. Liu Dongli asked if everything was okay with him, but the young man was wounded because the monster's blow hit him right on the shoulder. The man took aim at the gun. His gaze was stern and did not bode well. The enemy was prudent. He had a plan, and for this he approached the water pump. He opened the drain pipe, and with the help of good pressure he was able to rise up. The next second, the monster was about to run away. It ran into Liu Dongli and Huang Shi. But the monster had one weakness, and Liu Dongli was well aware of it. His hypnotic gaze made the enemy taken aback, and he lost his vigilance for a while. This moment was enough to hit the monster with all his might, and he fell, hitting his head painfully on the asphalt. Liu Dongli fired a few final shots, and the enemy lost consciousness for a few moments. The monster was wounded and lay immobilized. Everything around was quiet and deserted. Huang Shi said that they were lucky because there was enough light here, and they were able to overcome the monster with the help of Liu Dongli's abilities and lighting. But suddenly, the guy discovered that water began to actively splash out from the column. This was a completely unforeseen circumstance, and besides, the defeated monster soon began to move. Huang Shi could not believe that their enemy came to his senses so quickly and was able to escape. He looked around carefully, but could not find traces of the monster that had escaped from them. Liu Dongli said that they urgently need light because they have stopped seeing anything, and this is very dangerous. Huang Shi turned on the flashlight on his phone and quickly tossed it to his partner. The monster was able to reflect this throw, and the phone returned to the guy's hands again. Huang Shi made a second attempt, but it was also unsuccessful. He had to find hand cream in Liu Dongli's purse. However, this did not really help in overcoming the monster's word. Liu Dongli was noticeably nervous. The guy was frantically looking for something else he could throw in order to blind the monster. The next moment he threw eye cream to his partner, but this also turned out to be useless. The tension was growing, and it was necessary to quickly decide on some action. The guy shouted angrily that it would be better to run away because it was impossible to find anything in this bag. There were sunglasses, some keys, holy water, and a lot of little things. Ultimately, the guy found something quite useful. It was a makeup mirror. He threw this thing to Liu Dongli. The man was happy because it could be used well. Liu Dongli deftly grabbed the mirror. Now their worst enemy would not be able to escape. He had a good plan with which to disarm the monster. After all, a professional gigolo's makeup mirror usually had a backlight. Thus, their enemy could accurately and in every detail appreciate the beautiful appearance. But the monster did not look at them. With a sharp movement, he gouged out his own eyes. Liu Dongli fired again, and the monster angrily let out a loud roar. But the next moment, he flew to the side as a bullet hit the monster. He was furious and ran into Liu Dongli, who also fell and hit himself. The monster radiated danger and was quite difficult to defeat, so it was necessary to retreat. Huangshi suggested that he could hide and wait, and then attack unexpectedly. So he grabbed his partner, and they ran to quickly hide behind the wall. The monster was furious. He lost sight of them and tried to find them, destroying everything in his path. But Huangshi, together with Liu Dongli, hid, remained silent, and did not make sudden movements. The monster tried to find them and looked around the surroundings, but passed by because he did not see those he was looking for. I Ching suddenly intervened and looked carefully at everything, assessing the situation. The monster looked at the girl in confusion. He did not dare to attack her. Liu Dongli hurriedly closed his partner's mouth as he screamed in surprise and almost gave them away. Soon, the monster deftly, literally in a couple of leaps, found itself near the girl. He swung his huge clawed paw, but the investigator remained unperturbed. The next second, a shot was heard and the monster flew to the side. The girl dispassionately held a huge machine gun in her hands, with which she wounded the enemy. The monster fell to the ground with a wild cry. He was very wounded and was losing strength with every second. Then, more crushing shots were heard from the other side. The monster understood that he was losing because he did not expect to meet such a set. His limbs flew in different directions from these shots aimed at him. He fell a few meters from the investigator, hitting his head painfully. Special Forces soldiers lurked nearby on the roof and provided protection for I Ching. Fiery shots began to rain down on the monster from all sides. He no longer had the opportunity to dodge them. Cold-blooded men shot, and this continued for quite a long time. All the monster's attempts to dodge and somehow escape failed. Huangshi, along with Liu Dongli, hid and watched silently. They did not dare to interfere. Finally, they could catch their breath. They felt very tired. I Ching looked at her friends with an appraising glance. She was not too pleased. Liu Dongli said that apparently over the past 2 days, they had been constantly under the gun of sniper rifles. The girl noticed that initially she did not want to interfere because she assumed that they would figure it out on their own. Liu Dongli had some conclusions regarding their enemy. The monster's abilities remained a mystery, but the man suggested that he had seen his stigmata before in the professor's documents. They fought with the legendary monster Chimera, about which there are rumors that he has the face of a monkey and the body of a tiger, the limbs of a lion, and the tail of a real snake, and the monster can also fly without wings. Liu Dongli hesitantly added that according to some signs, the monster had only recently reached the etheric stage and therefore was not very advanced in its ability to fly high. The man was puzzled as to how he was able to resist a creature with an etheric stage with his gold. I Ching impatiently asked if there was any other information. Liu Dongli nervously noted that he did not have time to discover anything else, since this man disappeared. After a while, they said goodbye, and I Ching promised to keep him informed of the investigation. At parting, the investigator looked sideways at Huangshi, but did not say anything, and they soon disappeared from sight. Huangshi muttered in bewilderment, "Does this girl really dislike him that much?" But Liu Dongli patted him on the shoulder good-naturedly. He said that I Ching never behaved like ordinary people, but due to the fact that the guy insulted her well last time, he could only pray. Huangshi was angry at this remark, but Liu Dongli was put off. He thought about his suspicions, because during the battle it seemed to him that the guy sent that weak vibration from his source. That is, he directly had the abilities of the Ascendant. It was night, A bright moon was shining in the sky, illuminating a large office building. The monster returned after a difficult battle to regain his strength. He used a special magic box to restore his own appearance. The werewolf angrily said that the Astronomical Society intervened and was not given the opportunity to carry out his plans. Moreover, he suffered greatly from them and almost died. Now, the monster was very interested in what his boss was going to do now and what thoughts he had on this matter. The man hesitated for a moment and then said that now the monster had become the target of the Astronomical Society and it was dangerous to be in Senhai. So, after the final evening mass, he needed to leave. But they still had a lot of time, so they had to strain and work as hard as possible to accumulate a sufficient number of sources of matter. And although the plan as a whole seemed successful, his interlocutor reminded him about the mission in the quarantine zone. This question puzzled the boss very much. The man did not know how to answer it correctly. Huangshi recalled how the investigator talked to him. At the first meeting, she said that she had not seen him for a long time, but he could not remember where they could have met. Suddenly, the guy was brought out of his reverie by Kai Ji, angrily pouring the contents of a glass of sweet tart wine onto him. Lu Dongli decided to make amends for the situation. He hugged the girl and told her not to be angry, since the guy was new here and was not quite familiar with the rules. He took her away and looked meaningfully at the guy, hinting to Huang Shu that it was time to improve. The guy took a towel and dried himself, catching his breath, but suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from the wound on his shoulder. After that battle, he still did not fully heal his wounds and they reminded of themselves. Huang Shi thought that last night he was in great danger and if he is not careful further, he may lose his life. But now he has absolutely no strength. These thoughts depressed him because he has no guarantee of safety, so he is completely dependent on the circumstances. Huang Shi also noticed that his difficult life did not change at all with the appearance of the source. Lu Dongli walked around the bar in turmoil looking for the guy, but could not find him. The man thought that his ward was too curious and was meddling in matters that did not concern him. But soon he discovered Huang Shi, who was furiously eating a hot dog bought on the street. Lu Dongli realized that he was worrying in vain. Apparently, the guy was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat inside but bought cheap fast food. But at the same time, it was impossible to ignore that now he decided to take the course of the dog, which contained as many as 2 sausages. Huang Shi responded to this remark that his interlocutor could do the same if he wanted, but Liu Dongli noticed that he came here not for this but to reproach the guy, because in 2 days of work, he received many comments because of him. Huang Shi confidently noted that it was because of his extremely attractive appearance. Then he added that if a man is embarrassed by this, he can go and punish the lady who poured wine on him and threatened to drown her at the bottom of the river. Huang Shi philosophically noted that such trifles are not worth attention, and if he were constantly angry because of this, he would have already died of anger 5 years ago. Then the guy calmly walked up to the cellar and ordered another hot dog. Liu Dongli thought that this guy was really strange. It was hard to say whether he was a happy person or just dumb as a plug, but this had some advantages. He suggested that Huang Shi visit a good place where he can really eat delicious food, but the guy reminded him that he also had an unpaid electricity bill. Liu Dongli angrily remarked that he already worked as a bodyguard for free, but Huang Shi reminded him that it was his gentle guard who needed warm water from the boiler. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a girl. She asked if she understood correctly that in front of her was Huang Xiu, and when she heard confirmation of her guesses, she joyfully took the guy's hand. Lia Shuimeng asked not to eat unhealthy fast food but to have lunch with them in honor of Old Man Yang's birthday. After some time, a guy and an old man were sitting in the living room, looking at each other with displeasure. Old Man Yang said menacingly that he had only invited the guy out of politeness, but he had already arrived. The guy asked why, in this case, he pushed him into the lair of the gigolo. His opponent replied that Huang Shi gladly accepted this offer and even took his colleague with him. At this time, Li Shuimeng happily said that they had already cooked and everyone should sit down at the table. However, the tension at the table was very noticeable and those present tried to discern the situation. The girl noticed with annoyance that little Huang Shi came to visit him and the owner of the house had to keep his face. And despite the fact that he had deceived the man, he also did not hesitate to mention the commission for his work. This dialogue made the guy laugh very much. Ian looked at him with displeasure and told him to calmly eat his food. After eating, the girl took a languid drag, and Huang Shi said that she shouldn't smoke. But she said that it is better to live one less day but to the fullest. But because she gives up this addiction, the disease will not go away. In addition, her soul is tormented by sympathy for the old man who is looking after her. Yang flew into the room in a rage and told Li Shuimeng to immediately stop smoking because he did not allow a doctorate. She told the man in a firm voice to repeat what he had just said. Her gaze was cold and cruel. Then she good-naturedly turned to the guy so that in the future, if Yang deceives him again, then let him turn to her. After dinner, they went outside to see Huang Shi and Liu Dongli off in a taxi. Yang burst into tears and wanted them to leave as soon as possible. He asked the guy if he had heard anyone recently. Huang Shi looked questioningly at his interlocutor. The man replied that people came to him and asked about him last night, offering him some money for information. Yang stated that there was no point in remaining silent, so he told everything he knew. Besides, they would have found out anyway by turning to someone else. The man said that this time he was really to blame, but they had huge difficulties with money, so they had to agree. Ian was ready to share his compensation and handed over a couple of bills. He said that he would find out how things were going, and until that moment it was better for the guy to hide. Huang Shi was glad that his money, taken by fraud, returned to him. Then the guy asked what people were looking for him, and the man replied that he noticed the license plate of the car. Apparently it was a charity foundation. For a few moments he remembered what name this organization had, and soon said that it was goodness and philanthropy. The office worker carefully studied the information that old man Yang provided him. But suddenly a noise was heard behind him, and a moment later a bullet flew in. The guy fell. He frantically tried to reach for his pistol in order to protect himself from the attackers. But he was not allowed to do this. Armed snipers stepped on the weapon and took aim. The guy shouted out that he didn't want to die, so he was ready to cooperate with the investigation. I-Ching carefully examined the data that was provided to her. The charitable foundation had the top of the city among its leaders and was essentially a fraudulent organization. Her partner said that the Department of Special Affairs and other departments have different directions. There were a huge number of people who were involved in dishonest schemes. He invited people there, some of them donated money, others took courses on increasing positive energy, supposedly certified by a Chinese research company, but in fact no valuable information was provided during the training. In his hands on the tablet, the investigator had photos of the leaders who held the strings of the entire system. One of them, Tu Tai, the man in charge of charity, was present at the interrogation, and the second one, who was the boss, is called Wang Hai. He created the Heavenly Father Savior Association, which was based on blind human faith and to lure money. But despite the fact that the student and the boss worked in tandem, they still did not trust each other, and now Tu Tai was ready to lay out and tell all the secrets to save his own skin. The man said that they had sermons and used supernatural powers. Wang Hai constantly hid one box with a riddle inside. Tu Tai didn't know what was there, but a pleasant aroma was coming from the box. And when he felt it, it became easy and good. As if he had just rested, it was not scary to overcome difficulties. A similar effect was obtained by people who came to the courses, so it could be concluded that there were drugs there. The interrogated was asked where his boss now lives, but he said that apparently he had fled. He said that Wang Hai was now in the city of Laotang because he was going to hold the last sermon there and then disappear from sight. Overall, I-Ching thought that the matter was quite simple, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fishy here. She looked at Huang Shi. It seemed to her that this guy did not tell everything that he should have, despite his assurances. The investigator decided that it was necessary to act, and, first of all, the task was to find out what the Association of the Heavenly Father Savior actually does. She said that in the end we are talking about relics, and among the enemies there are ascendants, so it is unknown what they are hiding. Apparently, the assistant investigator could handle this task. Liu Dongli, the assistant investigator, said that on behalf of the Department for Special Cases, he wanted to thank him for his help and support. But in order for the investigation to be effective, it is necessary to add one more person to this investigation. The man took Huang Shi's hand and said that if the two of them would do this business, it would be great. The guy replied that he was not going to risk his life and would not go anywhere. I-Ching tried to persuade him, noting that this was just a small and unnecessary investigation. Huang Shi said in a rage that if this was not necessary, he refused, and according to the agreement, he had to play the role of bait. I-Ching recalled that during the signing of the agreement, they agreed to an unspoken change in the rules for monetary compensation. Huang Shi said that he would not take risks for small pennies, but suddenly discovered that 8,000 yuan had been credited to his account. The guy added that he could die there and as a result he wouldn't even have money for the funeral, but he noticed that he added another 700 yuan. The investigator headed for the exit, while Huang Shi and Liu Dongli remained standing in place. They were soon captured by armed special forces to prepare for the operation. Apparently, the friends had no choice and no time to think or somehow refuse this. Liu Dongli ironically noticed that his partner forgot to leave a 5-star review and buy wreaths for his farewell. The vehicle transporting pigs suddenly braked near the receiving point. It was necessary to unload the carcasses. The tired driver agreed to go with the customer and have a snack at a new local store. The man shouted to his partner to sort out the unloading themselves and for him to leave for a while. The disguised Huang Shi, who played the role of a loader, asked his friend whether this was considered a hidden penetration. His interlocutor nodded because that's what it was called, but they must get straight to the place and catch the culprit warm, taking the stolen things. Huang Shi took off his outer clothing and threw it off the bridge into the river. Liu Dongli encouraged the guy, saying that there was no need to be afraid because on his side there were hundreds of brothers with guns at the ready, but if something unexpected happened, Huang Shi could send a notification. After all, the Astronomical Society is a very serious organization, and with the help of a selected mask, even the guy's own mother will not recognize him. Huang Shi asked what his next steps would be, and Liu Dongli thought for a bit, but his gaze was caught by a woman passing by. Liu Dongli was not the kind of person who would let a representative of the fair sex pass by, so he said that the guy should stay here and he followed the woman. Huang Shi was outraged because no one had explained to him how to get inside, but suddenly he heard a black raven flying overhead. The bird told the guy not to say anything, because they could be overheard and in addition, they were being closely watched. After all, I Ching is very careful. She has tremendous intuition, with the help of which she always thinks through the steps ahead. The girl does not trust Huang Shu because it seems to her that the guy is not sincere enough and is hiding a lot. The raven hurried away, but the guy began to ask what he should do. The bird said that Huang Shi himself was under suspicion, and if he had known this earlier, he would not have advised him to cooperate with the Astronomical Society. Raven added that he had been hiding for quite a long time, but was once a highly respected member of the Astronomical Society. The guy was surprised because he had heard about this for the first time. And the bird said that as long as the girl is not sure of Huang Shi's intentions, she will keep him close, and it is necessary to take advantage of this moment, especially since the raven is now in an extremely difficult situation. The guy looked in confusion as the bird dissolved in the sky. He understood that words are not yet devoid of the power of persuasion, and although there is danger, you can take risks. Huang Shi was left standing alone, the last of the big highway. It was a beautiful sunset. The sun was already setting. He thought that the city was really slowly but surely declining. So there were fewer and fewer young people here, and Shanghai was also experiencing an economic recession. Suddenly, it dawned on him. Huang Shi realized that this could be a surprise that would help with the implementation. The guy began to think frantically. He had a wonderful idea that he would implement. Huang Shi realized that there was still some devilry left in this abnormal place, and he quickly ran forward. I Ching carefully watched the guy through the blue screen. She said that the target had begun to take effect. She looked at the guy carefully and asked the employee to show her closer. However, no grandiose events followed, because this strange guy simply decided to have an ice cream snack. I Ching thought with annoyance that this guy was really so hopeless. It was no longer clear whether there was something wrong with him or with her. Suddenly distracted and brought out of his thoughts, local musicians turned to him for help. The men needed to move the cart to a yard near a local establishment. Huang Shu did not object and began to help move the wheelbarrow to the bar. Musicians made a living by playing tunes in catering establishments. They opened the cover. There were many musical instruments, flute, drums, pipes, and much more. One of the men took the sono, and the guy began to listen carefully and then clap to the beat. The musician said that the young man had good hearing and could discern good playing of the instrument. The man suggested trying to play, and Huang Shi agreed with pleasure, because he was a professional in this matter. The guy took the erhu musical instrument into my hands and began to play a gentle, wonderful melody. This activity fascinated him. Huang Shi loved to play, and the people gathered around him listened attentively. The men looked in amazement. The melody turned out to be very decent, and they noticed the talent in the guy. They were interested to know where he was from. Huang Shi said that he was new here and had recently gotten a part-time job. He didn't understand why the musicians were so interested in him, and said that if they didn't want to see him here, he would leave. But one of the men said that everything was fine. They just had a misunderstanding, and the one who played the erhu could not come, and Huang Shi could help by replacing him and playing in the church. This proposal caused a storm of emotions in Huang Xi's soul. On the one hand, a speech in the church could serve as a good introduction. On the other hand, he was alone and had huge risks of saying goodbye to his life as a result of his adventure. But then the guy remembered that he was being actively monitored, so help would arrive if something went wrong. He accepted the offer but said that first he needed to have a good dinner.